My issues with my wife began not so long ago, a couple of months back, maybe a bit earlier, though I can't pinpoint exactly. But that's not so important. At first, I thought it was just the grind of everyday life taking its toll. We started spending less and less time together. The romance disappeared. The tenderness faded. Honestly, I can't even remember the last time we were intimate. We were both buried in work, only meeting at dinner or occasionally on weekends when we'd go to the city to grab a coffee or take a stroll along the waterfront. It might sound like I'm describing an ordinary family life. Thankfully, we didn't have kids yet, and after everything I'm about to tell you, it's unlikely we ever will. We got married not too long ago and, as expected, started living together. We rented a modest apartment in one of the many residential neighborhoods of the capital. Before the wedding, everything was perfect. Cute gifts, dinner dates at restaurants, and all that. Even after the wedding, for a while, things were great. I'd come home from work to a wonderful smell in the apartment. The table was set, the place felt warm and cozy. It seemed like everything a man could want for perfect happiness. No nagging, a full stomach, warmth and comfort at home. Life felt like a fairy tale. But my fairy tale didn't last as long as I'd hoped. The smell of delicious food gradually disappeared from the house, and petty arguments over nothing became our routine. I didn't understand why. I attributed it to her being tired from work, probably, although, at times, I wondered if she was seeing someone else. But I ruled that out after thoroughly checking her phone and computer while she was asleep. I slowly lost the desire to come home. I found any excuse to spend as much time as possible outside the house. I stayed late at work on purpose, and sometimes I even walked home, which took hours. If Vika called, though, I had to hurry back to avoid another argument. I should mention that I don't have close friends, nor much family besides Vika. My mom passed away when I was a child, and I've never seen my dad. So, I had nowhere to go, and no one to confide in. Why not just divorce her, you might ask? I don't know. Maybe because I still love her, or maybe it's just habit. I kept hoping things would work out, that we'd become a happy and loving family again. We tried several times to sit down and talk calmly without shouting or throwing things. Sometimes it worked, but only briefly. One day, Vika suggested we visit her grandmother. She said, we should check in on her. She must be lonely. I shrugged and agreed. If we had to, we had to. We didn't have a car, so we'd need to get there however we could. As far as I remembered, a train went in that direction. Then we'd have to take a bus and walk a bit. That day, Vika was in a great mood. She even made me breakfast, which surprised me. It was a rare occurrence. So, we bought train tickets, settled into our seats, and soon the rhythmic sound of the wheels lulled me into a light sleep. After all, I had to wake up at the crack of dawn. Dima, wake up, we're almost there. My wife's voice reached me faintly. Reluctantly, opening my eyes, I grabbed our bags of gifts from the overhead shelf and shuffled toward the exit just as the train began to slow down. Vika's grandmother had already called, eager to see us. Vika was delighted, but I couldn't say the same about myself. Everything was annoying me, starting with the crowd gathering at the exit and ending with the view outside the window. A massive black cloud loomed ominously, ready to unleash its fury at any moment. After leaving the train, we headed to a small parking lot near the train station, where the bus we needed was supposed to stop. We waited for about an hour. Saying I was furious would be an understatement. It felt like Vika and I had swapped personalities. Normally, she would lose her temper over every little thing, and I'd be the one calming her down. After an hour, an old PAZ bus finally arrived, packed with retirees. Vika and I had to stand since it's customary to give up seats to the elderly. 40 minutes of this, standing in this rust bucket. How did she pick a place this remote? I thought bitterly, swaying from side to side as the bus jolted along the bumpy road. I regretted selling my old car, a rusty bucket of bolts, but at least it was mine. Halfway through the trip, it began pouring rain. a torrential downpour that had me silently praying it would stop by the time we reached our destination. Of course, as is typical in such situations, no miracle occurred. We left the bus at the height of the storm, lightning flashing, thunder rumbling, and rain pounding down in sheets. Completely soaked, Vika and I trudged along a dirt road that had quickly turned to mud. "Why did we have to come here today of all days?" I muttered. "Dima, Grandma really wanted us to come. She needed some medicine and hasn't seen me in a year. The last time was for her birthday when I came with my parents. Remember? How could I forget?" I grumbled. "Don't be such a grump, love. Look, you can already see the village," she said, with a smile that, strangely enough, warmed my heart. Maybe it was her beautiful smile, or maybe it was just relief at finally nearing our destination. "It's been ages since I've been here," Vika mused, looking around at the sagging fences and decaying wooden houses. "What did you expect? People are leaving. What's there for them here?" "Yeah, just the retirees living out their days," she said. "Still, it's changed so much in just a year, and not for the better. The last time we came, everything was blooming and beautiful. Time passes, people die or move away, and nature takes over," I replied matter-of-factly. Grandma met us at the gate. It seemed like she'd been waiting there the entire time we walked from the bus, as soaked as we were. Inside the house, we found a modest table set and, most importantly, warmth, much needed after being drenched to the bone. I won't go into detail about what we talked about, but I'll say that Grandma had changed a lot, both in appearance and mentally. Well, she was almost in her 90s, so it wasn't surprising. Still, some of her behavior unsettled me, like when we were eating. She's sitting there, chewing on a piece of bread, talking about something, and then suddenly she starts howling. And not just a little, this drawn-out wailing. At first, I thought she might be in pain, but after a few seconds she stopped and continued her story as if nothing had happened, and her hands were shaking, that you had to see. Well, it's understandable. Old age, after all, is like that. And Vika had asked me not to pay too much attention, understanding that the old lady's mind was slowly starting to unravel. Or here's another thing. This was already closer to the evening. We had washed ourselves in the basin, as is customary, and were sitting in the kitchen drinking tea. The grandma was sitting there, tying a scarf on her head, and then suddenly, wham! She slammed her fist on the table. I jumped out of my seat in fright. For a few seconds, she stared straight into her granddaughter's eyes. I got chills all over my body from that look, and then, once again, she acted as if nothing had happened, sipping her tea calmly. I tried not to pay attention to these peculiarities, but with every such episode, it became harder and harder to ignore. And mind you, we only came here for a couple of days. I doubt I'll last the night. When we went to bed, I heard her footsteps. No lights were turned on anywhere. I could understand if she was going to get a drink of water or use the bathroom, but no, she was just walking around the house like a sleepwalker, loudly creaking the old floorboards. I couldn't fall asleep for a long time, and neither could Vika. But somehow, closer to 2 a.m., I finally drifted off. However, I wasn't destined to sleep until morning. I woke up to find it was still dark outside, and there she was, standing right over our bed, whispering something rapidly that I couldn't make out. I lay there, pretending to be asleep, listening to her incoherent mumbling. She stood there, staring at the sleeping Vika with her old, piercing eyes. Honestly, it gave me the creeps. My wife was peacefully snoring when the old lady placed her bony hand on Vika's face. At that moment, Vika woke up in fright and almost fell out of bed. The grandma, as calmly as ever, turned around and went back to her room, mumbling strange, unintelligible words the whole time. "Vika," I whispered, "maybe we should leave." My wife only stared at me with fear in her eyes. "How? There's no way to leave this wilderness now. The next bus is tomorrow," she said. "Well, let's leave in the morning. Today she's whispering, but tomorrow she might grab a knife, or worse," I muttered quietly. "Watch out, or you might end up needing the knife yourself," came a voice from the next room. I froze in place. How did she hear me? I'd whispered barely loud enough for Vika to hear. There's definitely something off about her. We didn't sleep a wink for the rest of the night, staring at the yellowed ceiling. As soon as the dawn broke, we packed our things and headed to the bus stop. In the morning, the grandma seemed to have returned to her usual self and even tried to convince us to stay longer. But I lied, saying we urgently needed to get back to work. We'd already walked quite a distance from the house when I glanced back. She was still standing at the gate, watching our retreating backs. At that moment, I even felt a bit sorry for her, as a fellow human being. The Grim Reaper was clearly waiting for her already, and of course, she wanted her grandchildren and children to stay just a little longer. Who knows when or if they'll meet again. That day marked the beginning of some strange and unusual things in my life. In a good way, surprisingly. We came home exhausted, as if we'd been unloading train cars. Yet Vika still managed to prepare dinner. Grandma said she'd given us some meat, courtesy of local hunters, either moose or venison. It was dark and rich, and the stew filled the apartment with an incredible aroma. What's gotten into her? I wondered at the time. Normally, after trips or outings like this, Vika would crash onto the bed and not get up until she needed to use the bathroom. Maybe Grandma had managed to teach her how to act around a man. After all, when we were leaving the village, they had been chatting about something outside while I was packing the bags. Who knows? I sat down at the table, and Vika's smile didn't leave her face. It was so unusual, though I quickly got used to it. Good things are easy to get used to. Vika became calm and even-tempered, and the spark returned to our relationship. I don't know where she got all this energy, but she managed to go to work, cook meals, take care of herself, hit the gym, and get her nails, brows, and other beauty treatments done. I couldn't take my eyes off her. Every day, she spoiled me with interesting dishes. She even bought herself a recipe book, a completely out-of-character thing for her. Honestly, it felt like I was living with a different woman, and damn, I liked it. The only thing was, Vika occasionally stayed late at work, though very rarely. Things happen, I thought. She works in an office, and from her stories, she often finishes her tasks quickly, only to be given more. As usual, I had no reason to doubt her. One evening, while I was idly scrolling through my phone, Vika was in the kitchen preparing yet another culinary masterpiece. Suddenly, I saw a news post in a local group. I wouldn't have paid attention if not for the familiar location. It was about the gym that my wife sometimes went to. The post read, "Near this gym, workers found a body, or rather, what used to be a body. The photos were blurred, but it was clear something horrific had happened. The workers who had come to fix something made the discovery." "Vika," I called out toward the kitchen, "take a look at this." She came over, and I pointed to the phone. "That's the gym you go to," I said. "Yeah, so," she replied. "They found a dismembered body in a manhole nearby. Can you believe it? Creepy stuff. You're unbelievable. Showing me something like this while I'm cooking." For the first time in days, I saw her look displeased. "Come on, go wash your hands and sit down at the table," she said firmly. "On it." I tossed the phone aside and hurried to wash up. When I came back, she had quickly placed the phone on the table as if she hadn't even touched it. "What did you want to see there?" I teased. "Just that news post," she replied casually. The girl was so young, and I think I might know who it is. They say she was last seen leaving the gym. I'm almost certain she used to train there. I think I've seen her a couple of times. A pretty girl. Well, what kind of beasts could do something like that, I thought, as the aroma of stewed beef, as my wife called it, filled the entire house. Not waiting for her to sit down, I attacked the dish like I hadn't eaten for days. "How is it? Want some more?" Vika asked, smiling, after I finished my plate. "If I may," I grinned. "Of course you may. What kind of question is that?" "There's more meat in the fridge," she said. "What, did you rob a farm?" I teased. She hesitated a bit. "Not exactly. There's a girl at work whose mom works at a meat factory. She sneaks some out and sells it fresh at a discount." "What a thoughtful mom," I said, savoring the flavor. It was pure culinary bliss. "You know," I joked, "if you had someone working at a brewery too, it would be perfect." "Sorry, no such connections," she smiled, joining me at the table. Everything was fine until that night, when I suddenly got hit with stomach pain so bad I thought I might die. I spent an hour and a half in the bathroom. Vika, on the other hand, felt fine, which was strange. Maybe I ate something bad at work, I thought. If it were something from home, Vika would be in line for the bathroom too. I hoped it would pass, but I spent the whole night running back and forth to the toilet, unable to sleep. I even had to call in sick because the pain was unbearable. Things started to escalate quickly after that, giving rise to troubling thoughts. The fridge was filling up with more and more meat. Not that I minded, but we couldn't eat it all fast enough, and several times I had to throw away spoiled pieces. "Vika, maybe it's enough already," I said while opening the fridge again. "Enough?" she asked. "Yes, we've got a full freezer, a full fridge. Might as well open our own store." "Fine," she muttered reluctantly. "It's not that I'm against it," I said, "but it's a shame when it spoils." "Okay, I'll take the last batch then," she smiled. "This one's veal, right?" Vika hesitated briefly. "Yes, that's right. They even supply it to restaurants, for steaks and all that. We lived happily like this for a while, and I even forgot the last time we had a fight." I couldn't stop marveling at how good things were. One day, the night before Vika's birthday, I prepared a surprise, a loud noisemaker and a gold bracelet. She had left for work early that morning, so I didn't get a chance to wish her a happy birthday. I decided to wait for her return, hiding with balloons in our wardrobe, ready to jump out as soon as she walked in. Childish? Sure, but I thought she'd find it sweet. I heard the door unlock, and in walked Vika, holding a bag of groceries. "Sweetheart, are you home?" she called out. I stayed quiet, pretending I wasn't there. Our wardrobe is big enough to see most of the apartment from inside. I was watching through the crack in the wardrobe door, observing Vika as she walked around the apartment and then headed to the kitchen. When she pulled a bloodied human head from the bag, I was speechless. I hoped it was a prank, but it looked too real. Blood was dripping, the hair was matted, and chunks of flesh were hanging from the neck. I froze in horror. Vika looked at the head with such interest, as if trying to decide what to do with it. After a few seconds, she began to bite into it, and when she couldn't tear off the nose, she grabbed a knife. Through my eyes, she cut the hair, opened the skull, and took out the brain. Everything happening seemed like a nightmare, but I stayed silent, unable to reveal myself. She cleaned the blood, hid the skull, mixed pieces of flesh with other meat, and ground it through a meat grinder. Then, the terrible truth hit me. I had been eating human flesh for an entire month. I felt like vomiting right there in the wardrobe, but I fought to hold it in, praying I wouldn't make a sound to give myself away. But Vika heard it. She froze, then began to check the rooms. My heart sank when she came close to the wardrobe, but just then my phone rang, the ringtone shattering the silence. Vika turned to the wardrobe, and in a panic, I made the only move I could. I jumped out with a shout, "Surprise! Happy birthday!" Vika was startled, but quickly relaxed and hugged me, laughing at my clumsy attempt to set up a surprise. But I stood there trembling, and only thought about how I was going to escape this nightmare. Shaking, I replied, "I'm just stressed. I spent so much time picking out your gift, I was worried you wouldn't like it." I pulled a velvet jewelry box from my pocket and opened it. "Are you crazy? How could I not like such beauty?" she said, smiling, and immediately hugged and kissed me. "Thank you, my love," she said, admiring the gift. Meanwhile, I was trying to think of an escape plan, but she kept distracting me, almost as if she knew I had seen everything. "Let's eat," she said. "I made a feast. It's a celebration after all." I sat at the table. The sight of the food almost made me throw up. It wasn't the look, it was the realization of what those dishes were made from. I tried to hide my disgust as I watched her devour the human meat, struggling to keep it together. "Why aren't you eating?" she asked. I'm just not hungry," I muttered. She looked at me, her eyes full of accusation, and then suddenly dropped her fork onto the table, her voice turning cold. "You think I didn't know? You're wrong." Her voice wasn't quite hers anymore. It sounded harsh, almost unnatural. And then, as if the apartment itself responded to her, all the lights exploded, plunging us into darkness. A faint light from the street lamps outside barely reached the room. That's when I saw it. Vika stood up, but it wasn't her anymore. Her face twisted, the skin covered in dark, grotesque blotches, her head tilted at an impossible angle, like her neck had snapped. But what truly terrified me were her eyes. They glowed with tiny yellow sparks. She reached for me, and I froze in terror. The grip on my throat was so strong that it felt like my head would be ripped off. With a burst of adrenaline, I punched her in the face as hard as I could. She screamed in pain, and I used the moment to escape, running from the apartment as fast as I could, not even bothering to lock the door behind me. I didn't look back. My only thought was to get away from that cursed house and whatever Vika had become. That same night, I called the police and told them everything, though I left out the part about her speaking in a different voice and turning into something other. They found nothing, no body, no meat in the fridge, and no skull in the jewelry box. They almost tried to charge me for making up the story, but somehow it was brushed aside. I told them about the girl found in the sewer, and that it was likely the work of my wife, but they just laughed at me. Of course, they didn't believe me. A guy standing there in his pajamas, red-faced and barefoot, saying his wife ate people. In the end, I moved to a new place, changed my number, and tried to forget it all. But just a couple of nights ago, I was woken up by a persistent knock at the door. Half asleep, I dragged myself to the door, wondering who could be visiting me at such an hour. When I reached the peephole, my blood ran cold. I almost collapsed onto the floor from what I saw in the dark in the stairwell. I clearly saw a dark female silhouette with disheveled hair, unnaturally long arms, and most importantly, 2 yellow lights visible on the bent head to the right. A strong bang on the door finally pulled me out of my sleep, and from the stairwell I heard, "I told you not to even think about running away," followed by another bang. That was the only thing I thought about at that moment, and only when I grabbed my phone and heard the noise from the wall did I realize the neighbors were waking up from the noise. In a hurry, she left the building, and then, damn it, I felt compelled to look out the window to make sure it was gone. It was standing under a streetlight in the far end of our yard, in all its glory, wearing the same dress from her birthday, now stained almost to her knees. It looked especially creepy, and those same yellow lights were staring straight into my soul. Even though there was a considerable distance between us, I felt her gaze. And then, bending herself into an impossible position, she quickly ran off into the darkness. This time, she tried to pretend she was a neighbor who had run out of salt, but I figured it out when I looked through the peephole. I could only be sure it wasn't the neighbor when I saw her face. I didn't sleep all night. I heard her steps in the stairwell, pacing outside my door until the morning. In addition to her steps, I also heard something else. She was mumbling something indistinct to herself, tapping my door, and those incoherent words reminded me of something. Yes, that night, her grandmother's voice. The next morning, when she disappeared, I packed all my things and decided to go to the village to ask the half-crazy old woman if she was responsible for what happened to her granddaughter. It was after visiting her that Vika had radically changed, first for the better, then for the worse. I was shocked when I arrived in the village and found nothing but abandoned ruins of old houses, not a single living soul. Everything overgrown with weeds and bushes. One didn't need to be a genius to realize that no one had lived in the village for a long time. But then, how was it possible? Who did we visit? Maybe Vika's parents could give me an answer. We hadn't really kept in touch, but later that evening, I went over for a quick cup of coffee, and they told me something that made my skin crawl again. At first, they laughed at me when I mentioned visiting the village, but when they saw my condition, they stopped and the conversation shifted. It turns out Vika's grandmother had died about 6 months ago, and since she was one of the last inhabitants of that backwater village, her body wasn't discovered until it had turned into a rotting mass of flesh mixed with flies and maggots. It was impossible to enter the house, and the locals, to avoid the smell, just sealed everything off. The elderly couple, who were already struggling to move, didn't have the strength or desire to bury the old woman properly. When we arrived, only the bones remained. "Where's Vika?" they asked. "She's probably still at work," I muttered. And without finishing my coffee, I staggered to the door. "Say hi to her from me," her mother called out. I quietly left the apartment and stumbled home. I thought, maybe she'll come again tonight. Perhaps I should stop by the church on the way. Maybe they can help me.